Friedrich Nietzsche was a German philosopher best known for his unconventional methods and his critique of Christian morality. He was born in 1844 in a small town called Rocken, which is near Leipzig. He studied something called philology, which is the historical study of language, at the University of Leipzig, and then became a professor at the University of Basel in 1869 when he was only 24. He wrote his first book, The Birth of Tragedy, in 1872 and went on to publish over a dozen more, including Thus Spoke Zarathustra in 1883. His philosophy and his books were very critical of traditional European morality and religion, specifically Christianity. His style of writing is very unique as he has a very poetic and literary writing style, not as dry and academic as some other philosophical texts can appear to be. Eventually he became sick in 1899 and he died the year after in 1900. So what is Thus Spoke Zarathustra actually about? The story roughly goes as follows. A prophet called Zarathustra has been living in solitude for the past 10 years. He finally decides to descend from this cave in the mountains, brimming with love and wisdom that he wants to share with the rest of humanity. When he does descend, his teachings receive a mixture of reactions, with him gaining many enemies along with some followers. He sets himself the task of diagnosing and eradicating the nihilism that he thinks pervades Western culture. But not only this, he also wants to create something new, something better in its place. A key focus of the book is on the future and meaning of the earth, which Nietzsche thinks is something called the Übermensch, or the overhuman as a English translation, something that we will get much more into later. Throughout the book, Nietzsche is, indirectly, very critical of Platonism and Christianity, particularly our belief in the existence of an otherworldly realm such as heaven or the Platonic forms of goodness and justice. According to Nietzsche, or Zarathustra, both of these cause us to forget our creative ability to change the future of the earth and to create our own values. More key themes covered throughout are that of the will to power and the idea of eternal recurrence. But why Zarathustra? Why does Nietzsche use this figure in particular? Zarathustra, who is also known as Zoroaster, was an ancient Persian prophet and was the founder of Zoroastrianism. He was the first to claim that morality, good and evil, is the highest type of authority. By acting morally, we will be granted eternal immortality on some final day of judgment. Zarathustra's idea that time is progress in the moral overcoming of earthly life had terrible effects on humanity and the earth, according to Nietzsche. These sacred views appealing to a high authority and blissful eternity sound very Christian, but Nietzsche holds that they originated with Zarathustra. But Nietzsche, very critical of religious morality, claims that Zarathustra created the disastrous error that is morality, a quote from his final book, Esse Homo. He says that God-given morality and a focus on heaven takes our minds away from the earth, meaning we despise it and do not see the earth's great potential, which Nietzsche sees as something called the Übermensch. However, Nietzsche admires Zarathustra for adhering to his highest virtue, the will to truth, by recognizing his mistake regarding morality. The new Zarathustra's ambition, the one in Nietzsche's book, is to carry out this goal. It is to correct the earth's mistaken view of morality and provide the earth with its own great meaning. Now, onto the book, which begins with Zarathustra's prologue. In the first paragraph of the book, comparisons are drawn between Zarathustra and Christ, which show him, Zarathustra, to be superior. Jesus spent 40 days in solitude in the desert and was 30 years old when he started teaching. Similarly, Zarathustra is 30 years old when he leaves his home in the mountains. However, he has spent an entire 10 years there, enjoying his solitude and gaining wisdom. He did not, like Christ, need angels to attend to him during this time of solitude. Also, comparing the time frames, it seems that Jesus taught much too soon and had not spent long enough in solitude like Zarathustra. Zarathustra begins his speech, directing it immediately to the sun, a classic symbol of enlightenment and truth. He asks the question, what would your happiness be if you had not those for whom you shine? He is making the point that the happiness of the sun, or its light, needs to be received by others. Otherwise, for who does it shine? It is the nature of the sun to project its light onto others. Similarly, it is the nature of the enlightened man to share his truths, his wisdom, and his love for mankind. He reinforces this point, stating how him, his eagle, and his serpent have been waiting attentively for the sun's light every morning. He has been open to receiving the truths and happiness that the sun brings to him. And we will talk more about the symbolism of the eagle and the serpent at the end of the video in section 10. Zarathustra exclaims that he is wary of the wisdom that he has gained. He is like a bee that has gathered too much honey and needs hands outstretched to take it. There is a comparison here between Zarathustra and the sun, whereby his wisdom, like the sun's light, is overflowing and he needs people to receive it. He has spent many years acquiring knowledge and wisdom and now yearns to share it with humanity. However, his wisdom has become too heavy for him to bear alone, and he needs to share it before he can acquire any more. At the end of the section, it becomes apparent that for Zarathustra, sharing one's hard-earned wisdom is a necessary part of the process. It allows one to go further into this journey towards the Übermensch. There is a key theme here of going under and bringing light to the underworld. This reinforces his newfound drive to descend from the mountains and bring his wisdom to the rest of mankind. The German verb used originally is untergehen, which has a variety of translations, such as to descend, to set, like the sun, again another comparison here between Zarathustra and the sun, or it can mean to be destroyed, perhaps representing how Zarathustra needs to destroy his old identity and create a new one that lives and teaches amongst mankind. And descent here can have a couple of meanings. He descends literally from the mountain, but it also symbolises a return to earthly things. This opposes typical spirituality, which can develop a hatred of the earth and the body, and it can get wrapped up in mystical experiences and other more heavenly worlds. In the second section, Zarathustra has begun his descent and encounters a holy man living in the forest at the base of the mountain, away from the rest of mankind. From their interaction, they appear to be mirror images of one another. Zarathustra entered the forest, wanting to discover how to love mankind, something which, apparently, he has succeeded in doing from his first words to another human being in 10 years. I love mankind. The holy man entered the forest with a great love of mankind, but now loves only God. Zarathustra leaves the mountain and the forest now with a great love for mankind. But in the forest, the holy man has realised that he no longer loves mankind, as they are too imperfect, too incomplete and impure to be loved. However, Zarathustra claims that mankind is to be loved precisely for their potential to give birth to the Übermensch, the new meaning of the earth, and this new meaning is the gift that Zarathustra wants to give them. But upon leaving the saint, who spoke continuously about praising God, Zarathustra exclaims, could it be possible? The old saint has not yet heard in his forest that God is dead. This is one of Nietzsche's most famous phrases, but what does it mean? It does not mean God was once a living entity, existing transcendentally, independent of the human, that has now died. Instead, we ought to think of God as a function, a certain way in which humans live their lives. So the phrase God is dead means that something has changed so that people no longer live as if God exists. For example, in the modern day, physics is able to discuss nature without any reference to God. Also, modern ethics can discuss human values without referring to God. By retaining our belief in God when God is in fact dead, metaphorically, we are led to two things. Firstly, nihilism, in which the earth becomes meaningless and the only thing with any value is the afterlife. And secondly, it means that the shadow of God is still cast over everything, preventing any real change that would provide the earth with a new meaning. Both of these things Nietzsche and Zarathustra attempt to overcome by providing an earthly meaning to the earth entirely independent of God, namely that of the Übermensch. Zarathustra, upon being in the mountains for so long, naively expected everyone else to become aware of this truth too. However, we will see later that humanity has not yet become aware of this. They have not yet realised that God is dead, and they are still stuck in their old ways. The shadow of God is still cast over them, and they are living nihilistically, without any earthly meaning. In section 3, Zarathustra finally arrives at the first town and quickly begins his first out of 3 speeches to the townspeople. This first speech is concerned with the death of God and how we will now find meaning and love the earth. The first thing Zarathustra teaches him regarding these matters is that of the Übermensch. The German word can be translated in many different ways. In the book it is translated as Superman, but sometimes it is better to leave it in its original German form. An alternative, and perhaps better translation, is overhuman. Over emphasises the going up and under theme throughout the text, and human because it's not gendered and does not concern an individual but the entire human species. Either way, now that God is dead, the Übermensch is the new meaning of the earth, the next evolutionary goal. The next passage illuminates how man is contemptible and still animalistic except for his great potential to give rise to the Übermensch, something that he needs to recognise and become aware of as soon as possible, hence Zarathustra's urgency in delivering this message. He emphasises how the Übermensch is the meaning of the earth. Meaning is to be found within the domain of existing things, not in a transcendent God, nor in the Platonic forms of goodness and justice. He says how we must remain true to the earth, we must rid ourselves of our dreams about heaven and immortality, and instead dedicate ourselves to laying the grounds for the Übermensch. Our reverence of these supernatural things causes us to forget or even come to despise the earth. Now, more on this notion of despising. Zarathustra says how we can redirect our despising or our contempt in a more productive fashion, something he calls the hour of the great contempt or despising. Now that our new meaning, the Übermensch, is grounded in the future, the greatest thing we can do is feel contempt for the past and present. We redirect our despising away from the earth and towards the past and the present, the actions that have led us into our current nihilism and meaninglessness with regards to the earth. All these great things, happiness, reason, virtue, justice, pity, need to be reconsidered, as up until now they have not led us to the Übermensch. But as soon as Zarathustra finishes his dramatic speech, the crowd bursts out laughing at him. The crowd do not take Zarathustra's message seriously. They simply think it was an introduction to the tightrope walker who is about to perform. Contrary to what he expected, they are not aware of the death of God, and hence do not receive his message about creating a new meaning for the earth. Now, his focus and his approach will differ. Instead of focusing on what mankind must feel contempt for, he will focus on what they can be loved for, namely their great potential. Zarathustra's second speech is now concerned with those that he loves, specifically those who help give rise to the Übermensch. He states that man is a rope fastened between animal and Superman, a rope over an abyss. A powerful analogy between man and the tightrope walker, precariously bridging the gap between the Übermensch and the meaninglessness and nihilism of the last man that lies below. And we'll talk more about the last man shortly. Next, he explains how the tightrope walker is motivated by a contempt of what is behind, a great despising, he calls it, and a longing for what is on the other side. Next, Zarathustra gives a long list of the traits of those who are helping to bring about the Übermensch. The language here is reminiscent of Christ's Sermon on the Mount, with the continuous repetition of the phrase, "Blessed are thee." Again, this compares Zarathustra to Christ, but presents Zarathustra with a different, more updated and urgent message to mankind, one focused on those who sacrifice themselves for the earth and the Übermensch, rather than sacrificing themselves for a transcendent God. But again, This second speech is not well received by the crowd. Zarathustra's explanation is that what they call culture, such as morality, their philosophical and scientific ideas, their religion, art, governments, and so on, all of this makes them too proud, and so they dislike anyone that speaks ill of it. Zarathustra's third and final speech is concerned with the type of man that blocks the Übermensch from ever arising, the ultimate man. The ultimate man is the direction humanity is heading. According to Zarathustra, they are heading towards the most contemptible man instead of the Übermensch. However, Zarathustra repeats through many analogies and images that it is not too late for humanity to change its course. He says that man still has enough chaos in him to give birth to a dancing star. The ultimate man is the most contemptible because he sees himself as the culmination of all human development and so sees no need to go any further. He makes everything small. He thinks he has discovered happiness by living simply and comfortably and in the reassurance of his neighbour. His lack of drive for hard living and commitment towards a great meaning for the earth means he works against the development of the Übermensch. Zarathustra sees this rise of the last man as being shameful, not something humanity should be proud of or strive towards. But again, unsurprisingly, the crowd do not receive Zarathustra's message. They scorn Zarathustra by jokingly demanding that they want the last man, not the Superman. Zarathustra, defeated for now, reflects that he speaks to them as if they were a goat herd. Perhaps they are just that and have already become the last man, hence why they don't appreciate his contempt for this type of person. But we will see that he retains hope, and instead of trying to win over the masses, he will try to win over a select few. However, the tightrope show which has been in progress goes horribly wrong when a jester pops out and leaps right over the tightrope walker, causing him to fall. This falling off of the tightrope symbolises the vulnerability of those who attempt to make the crossing to the Übermensch. The tightrope walker's mind cannot stay composed and he falls, it seems as if on purpose, from the tightrope, perhaps out of embarrassment. The jester can be seen as the danger that pushes one off the path to the Übermensch and into the meaninglessness and nihilism of the last man. On the journey from man to the Übermensch, one will be shaken many times but must remain composed and focused in order to continue the crossing. The tightrope walker crashes to the ground, badly injured and on the verge of death. Zarathustra runs over to console him, but the tightrope walker despairs that his life was meaningless and empty, that he was nothing more than an animal being taught to perform. However, Zarathustra reassures him that this is not so. He made danger his calling, and that is something to be admired. It is much better than the last man who lives a life of risk-free contentment. Section 7 is short and describes Zarathustra's reflection on the events that took place that day. The only person Zarathustra managed to teach a lesson to, namely that it is valuable to make danger one's calling, is the dead man. So he has not been as successful in teaching the masses as he had hoped. If he wants to dispense of his wisdom and deliver his messages, he will have to re-evaluate and change his approach. Before Zarathustra sets off to bury the dead body of the tightrope walker, he encounters the jester from earlier. The jester says how lucky it was for Zarathustra that the crowd thought him a fool, for otherwise they would have perceived him as a threat and a danger to them. He says that they could have easily turned on him and taken his life. This indicates that the jester's foolishness is a way to defend himself from the volatile collective consciousness of the crowd. He appeals to their sensibilities to stay alive. The crowd and their ideas and traditions are very dangerous things to talk out against and reject, hence why Zarathustra was so lucky and why the jester plays to the crowd's liking, not to risk them turning on him. Section 8 follows Zarathustra on his search for an appropriate place to bury the body, but on the edge of town, the gravediggers are there. They can be seen to symbolise those that figuratively deal with the dead, such as historians. But we can see how they mock Zarathustra for how different he is from the norm and the collective. They call him a thief, but Zarathustra does not simply steal the dead dogs from them, but instead steals the great transgressors, those that make danger their calling, those that rise above goat herds. He steals what is most valuable to them, even if they do not realise it. He continues past the gravediggers and encounters a lone hermit. However, this man he meets is very intent on everyone receiving his food, which he sees as his gift to them. Strangely, he has no pity for the dead man, and in fact takes no notice that he is even dead, yet he still urges, almost commands him to receive his food. The hermit seems to be a distorted view of what Zarathustra desires for humanity. For example, creating a new value and sticking to it, people being receptive to the gifts that he has for them, and also not showing pity for man, but instead acting out of a love for them and for their potential. The hermit accepts some of Zarathustra's teachings, but not quite in an ideal way. He has a human limitation, but is still on the right track. Section 9 again focuses on Zarathustra's reflections on what he has learnt from the day, and how he will change his approach to the people. From his first interaction with people in 10 years, Zarathustra has learnt a valuable lesson on how to proceed with teaching the message of the Übermensch. Namely, he will not try to win over the crowds en masse, but will now speak to a select few, those that hear his message and follow him out of their own will. Next, he talks about the good and the just, the herdsman, the common man, the last man. All those people who do not receive his message and hate him for coming into their town and talking out against their values and traditions. He now knows that they hate and want to banish those that try to create new ones in their place. The creators Zarathustra speaks of want to create new values for a better future, one for the Übermensch, but the good and the just are too stuck in their ways to allow this to happen. He goes on to say how his approach has changed, that he will now focus on winning over a select few, such as the creators and the hermits. The final sentence of this section sees Zarathustra compare himself with the jester. Zarathustra says how he leaps over those that hesitate, even if they are the ones going across. This shows that he is utterly committed to the Übermensch and will not be slowed down. In the final section of Zarathustra's prologue, he prepares for his second proper downgoing, since his first one was a kind of false start and did not go as planned. He looks up into the sky and sees an eagle sweeping through the air with a serpent, not like a prey, but like a friend, coiled around its neck. But why these animals in particular? What do they symbolise? Firstly, the eagle was the animal of Zeus and symbolised pride. The serpent was the animal of the Greek god Apollo and symbolised cleverness. Also, the eagle was the animal of Ormuzd, who was the creator deity in Zoroastrianism, which symbolised light. And the serpent was the animal of Ahriman, the evil spirit in Zoroastrianism, which symbolised darkness. Their intertwining symbolises the overcoming of dualism, such as the traditional morality of good and evil, along with the distinction between heaven and earth. It indicates that in our journey to the Übermensch, we must go beyond good and evil, which is the very title of another one of Nietzsche's famous books. The final sentence of Zarathustra's prologue is an exact repetition from the end of section 1. This shows that Zarathustra's first downgoing was not successful. He has had to re-evaluate his approach and will now attempt the downgoing again, and this is what part 1 of Zarathustra's discourses will follow in the next section. I appreciate everyone that has made it to the end of the video, and I hope you're looking forward to the next one. I hope you found the video useful, but do, as always, leave any questions or comments that you have down in the comments, and I'll do my best to answer them. Thank you again, and see you for the next episode. Goodbye.